Thank you for tuning in to this live broadcast. My name is Tim, and I am the executive producer at One Minute Apologist. Here at One Minute Apologist, we want to give you credible answers to curious questions. How do we do that? Well, sometimes it's through a live session where Bobby is teaching verse by verse through a book of the Bible. Or it might be by exposing you to other apologists. We want to encourage you to explore more of our content and theirs on your journey. During our live streams, we often take questions. We try to prioritize the questions that are relevant to today's topic. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's content and would like to support this channel, please visit our Patreon page. The stream will be starting soon. Thank you again for joining us.
What is up, peeps? I'm so stoked to have my dear friend Frank Turek on with me for this week's live. Frank, what's up, bro?
The great Bobby Conway, the 1 Minute Apologist. We're almost out of time in this 1 minute edition, so let's get to it.
Well, dude, we're expanding it. So like we're going from like the 1 minute apologist to the 1 hour apologist today.
Oh, beautiful. So we got some time then, huh? All right, good.
So what happened to your hat, bro? It looks like you stuck it in a wash and...
Yeah, well, I just want to be on the right team, dude. This is my team. What team are you on?
Hey, I'm right there with you, man, for I am not ashamed.
All right.
I am not ashamed.
Beautiful. Even though you're living in the People's Republic of California, huh? Can you wear this hat in California? Is it possible to wear a hat like this in California?
Yeah, you know what's funny is, so I'm in South Orange County. I live in Laguna Niguel. So when I got off the 5 freeway after my radio show today, I was coming home, and you had 3 stations selling Trump merchandise along Alicia Parkway. And I thought, man, you wouldn't see that going on in Hollywood, or you'd be in big trouble.
That's right. In the name of inclusion, tolerance, and diversity, we're going to firebomb you.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's not, an endorsement one way or another, but I do live in a much more conservative area of California. But absolutely. So I'm excited to have Frank Turek on. I know that pretty much everybody listening right now would be familiar with him. If you're not, you want to be. Frank Turek is the author of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Legislating Morality, one of my favorite books that he wrote, Stealing from God. He has his own radio show, crossexamine.org, right, Frank, or com?
Either one will get there, but it's more normally .org. Yeah, crossexamine.org, right there behind me. Right there. There it is.
There it is. So you're kind of pulling like the Billy Graham thing, right? Just sign Billy Graham and it'll get to me.
That's right. Yeah. To me, Billy Graham, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Billy Graham. Well, Frank's channel on YouTube is also just doing fantastic. Frank, I was blown away. I looked at it. You're inching up on 200,000 subscribers. What has happened there? That's wonderful.
My mom is on 200,000 different computers.
Right?
Like, that's my son.
That's my son. Yeah, my parents don't miss a lot of the episodes and stuff that I do as well. So it's
actually, cool. You can credit all that stuff to Jorge and the team. Now, Jorge Gill is our social media guy, and I've never personally uploaded anything on YouTube, but he knows how to do it, and his team knows how to do it, and they know how to edit stuff. So it's pithy. We get right to the point. So, most of those videos up there are anywhere between 1 and 7 minutes. People will watch short videos. I go to some YouTube channels, I see 3-hour things. I go, I don't think I could make that. I don't have the time right now, but at the 2 or 3 minute one, I can watch. So.
Well, Jorge has definitely done a great job, and your team. Love Jorge, and just excited to see what's happening there. Frank, I wanted to bring you in and rope you into a conversation because you do have such a great national platform. You have been doing apologetics for a long time. And kind of the topic that I thought would be fun for us to dig in together on is, why is apologetics more important right now than ever before? And when I thought about who could answer that question and really help our audience, I thought of you. I really feel like you get this. You're somebody who really has recognized for a long time the importance of enjoying our freedom here in the United States and not taking that for granted. So let's just start off with that question. Why would you say that apologetics is more important right now in America than ever before?
Well, in one sense, it's more important than ever before. In another sense, it's almost irrelevant. Why do I say that? It's important because there are a lot of people out there that are looking for answers and want answers. Yet there's an equal number or maybe more people out there that don't care about answers. They don't care about evidence. They just want to yell at you.
Yeah.
You know? And really, in a society, in a civilized society, there's only two ways to settle a dispute. You can settle it on principle, or you can settle it on power. In other words, principle would be, I have some arguments here, and I think this is the reason we ought to take this path. But there's a lot of people out there that don't want to do that at all. They just want to get enough power to shut you down. They want to get enough power to just impose their viewpoint without having any debate. That's why this is called the cancel culture now, because people just want to cancel the debate. They don't want to have a debate. So in one sense, it's more important now than ever because some people are looking for answers. In another sense, a lot of people don't care about reasons at all. They just want to shut you down because they have a preconceived ideology that they want to push forth, and it doesn't matter how much evidence you give them, they're never going to abandon it. In fact, here's a question I ask people, as you know, Bobby, on a college campus, because that's where we go. We used to go a lot. I don't know if we ever go anymore. But, you know, we do the I don't have enough faith to be an atheist presentation. Then we take questions for sometimes 2 hours after this presentation. And if atheists get up to the microphone and they ask a question and they express a little bit of hostility, I'll normally stop and I'll ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And I've had many atheists stand in front of hundreds of people in front of a microphone. I ask that question, if it were true, would you become a Christian? And they say no. Why? Because they don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. They want to be God of their own lives. In fact, they're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. And they just think whatever they want to do is going to make them happy. To have that freedom from any moral restraint is going to make them happy. And so they don't want God involved because God, they think, is going to put moral restraints on them. And you and I both know, we've been around long enough, that the only way to true contentment and happiness is to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. But people think Jesus is going to squash their fun, so they don't want him to be true.
Yeah, that is so well put, Frank. I think that this cancel culture idea that you've brought up is one of the reasons why it is so important that we do begin to speak up. I think it's hard to speak up when you're alone. You can get easily picked off. I think it's harder to speak up if you're not financially set. I mean, when you're financially set, you can say things and you don't have to worry about it as much.
Right.
But my fear is the church has been missionally mute for so long. And I think in some ways we have been painted out as, bigots and unloving. So we went from one extreme to the other where we're trying to be so loving, so kind, so gracious that now if we're speaking the truth, we almost feel bad for doing it. And so I really feel like the church is on missional mute, and we've got to figure out a way to speak up or we're going to lose our voice altogether in this culture. And so some of the things, when I think about why apologetics is important, I think about when the doors open back up after COVID, Frank, I'm imagining that church is going to look a lot different. You're going to have a mental health crisis on your hands. I bet attendance, I won't be surprised if church attendance is down a third on a national level a year to 2 years out, because people who are just going out of routine have lost the routine. And I just expect things to look a lot different. And I think that we live in a melting pot culture. We've got, Black Lives Matter. We've got this COVID stuff going on. You're wondering if we're turning into a communist country eventually. And all this stuff's happening. And I'm going, it's time for the pastors to really start equipping their flocks what it means to defend the faith. What do you think about this?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, my friend Jack Hibbs out there at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, at which I've spoken several times, he just put out a nice message to the church in California on his Facebook page, and we put it on our Facebook page as well, because he, in about 10 or so minutes, he said, look, Now's the time the church needs to step up. Now's the time the church needs to open its doors. And in fact, in his church, he's got sections where there's social distancing, and he's got other sections where people can take responsibility for their own actions, and you can wear a mask or not, or do what you want. Because look, if we knew then what we know now about this virus, we never would have shut down the whole country if we were reasonable. What we would have done is we would have sequestered the vulnerable, and everybody else would have gone about their business taking necessary precautions. We wouldn't have shut everything down, because you cannot treat 335 million people as if they're all 75-year-old diabetics who are overweight. You can't, okay? You can't shut an economy down like that, because more people die as a result of you shutting down the economy than die from the disease itself. And so what Jack is doing is he's saying, look, if you need to be social distance, great. We've got a whole room for you. If you want to interact with your fellow brothers and sisters, but don't come if you have the sniffles. Don't come if you're over a certain age. Don't come if you have a pre-existing condition of some kind. Otherwise, you can come and do church like we normally do. Okay. And I think that's pretty much the way to go, the way it should be going right now. And Jack is taking the lead on that. And he is actually obeying God rather than man right now, because as you know, Governor Newsom out there has prevented all this. You can go to a protest without a mask and be right up against somebody, and there's no problem. He's not going to say a word, but you can't go to church and do the same. That's a violation of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. And it's going to go to court at some point.
Yeah. So this is interesting, Frank. For me, I've always tried to stay kind of apolitical from the standpoint of, as a pastor, I recognize, boy, I've got a big obstacle that people got to overcome. It's called the gospel. And so we always tried very hard to be as welcoming as possible. And I would always say, teach the issues, don't even kind of mention the parties.
Right.
But it is interesting. I think about you when you spoke at the church where I used to pastor, or you being a little bit more verbal on political issues than I would be. And I think about the chart that you would show, like of North Korea, with like all the lights out, and then, juxtapose the rest of the world and the lights are all on.
Yeah.
Explain that chart.
Well, it's just a video. It's just an image, a satellite image. In fact, people who are watching right now, you could go to Google, and if you type in Korea satellite night, you're going to see an image that comes up, which is going to show North Korea dark and South Korea full of light. And there's one reason for the difference between South and North Korea, and that is politics. South Korea has political freedom, the North does not. And I always ask people, if you don't think politics are important, just ask yourself one question. Would you rather live in South Korea or North Korea? Obviously, you'd rather live in South Korea, right? Well, the reason that politics are so important is because politics affects everything else we do. Politics even affects our ability to do this YouTube stream right now. Because in China, we couldn't be doing this. In North Korea, we couldn't be doing this. Politics affects your ability to preach the gospel. If you don't think so, you can go to some of the countries I've been to. I've been to Iran. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I've been to China. You can't do what we're doing right now, or what we could do in church in America in those countries. Why? Because politically, they've ruled it out. So politics actually affects our ability to carry out our primary mission, which is the gospel. So we can't avoid the political questions because they impinge on everything else we want to do. And also, look, if we're not going to protect helpless people, who is?
Yeah.
If we're not going to protect the unborn, if we're not going to protect the family, if we're not going to protect people who are being treated unfairly and unjustly, who is? We're supposed to be the people doing that. And I'm tired of people saying, oh, you can't get involved in politics. Don't talk about that because it's a political issue. Well, 50 years ago, abortion was not a political issue, but the Supreme Court made it a political issue. 10 years ago, same-sex marriage, or 15 years ago, same-sex marriage wasn't a political issue, but the left made it a political issue. So are we to say that every time somebody, say the left, defines an issue as political, that we can't talk about it? Who said? Where does that come from?
Right. Yeah. So, Frank, I mean, obviously, one of the things I think that we're getting at here is, okay, so we've been maybe missionally mute as it relates to the gospel. We've been politically mute. And I'm not advocating that everybody needs to go, and be total campaigners and everything. I'm just saying I'm reflecting on my relationship with you. I've known you for a long time. I know that you've been, as I mentioned, more bold on these political conversations. I've been trying to unify the church and make sure we can come together. The gospel is kind of the one obstacle. But now, to your point, with showing North Korea versus South Korea, watching where our culture is going, I'm sitting here finding myself thinking, well, you know what? One of the apologetic issues of our day is to maybe recognize how important politics is, and making sure we have a free platform for the gospel. Because what North Korea is North Korea cancel culture.
Look at that. I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Here's South Korea right down here. Here's North Korea up here. South Korea has the gospel. It has freedom. It has, obviously, a much better economy. People aren't starving to death. North Korea is in a concentration camp. And the reason for the difference is politics. Now, this is an extreme example, obviously, but it shows you that politics is important. It's important to the church, too, because a church, while people can sometimes worship under persecution, and sometimes persecution can purge the church, we don't wish it on people. A church in America can do things that a church in North Korea, and they're not permitted to really meet, can't do. And so we want to be able to spread the gospel, and a society that respects freedom of religion is a society in which we can do that. And who's responsible for ensuring we have that society? We are in this country, we the people. So I think everybody ought to be in politics, ought to be involved in politics, Bobby, atheist to Christian, everyone in between. Because if you value how you're governed, and especially if you're a Christian, if you value your ability to preach and live the gospel, you have to be involved in politics, because the laws that are made in Washington, the laws that are made in your state and local governments affect everything you do, including how you live your life as a Christian.
And I do think, as it relates to, as a church, this is a good time. I mean, if there's a positive that can come out of, this quarantine, is, hey, let's reflect on why we do what we do. What's the best way to reach the culture? When we open up the doors again in the church, what are the questions that the flock's coming back with that we need to be ready to answer? And how do we equip them to be able to reach a culture for such a time as this? Because I really do feel like, evangelism used to look a lot simpler, right? Because the culture shared the values that the church did.
Right.
But no longer does the culture share the same values. So we have to do a lot more work. It takes time to understand pluralism, secularism, critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, all this stuff, so that we can have an engagement with the LGBTQ community. And when we just ignore all that, like, oh, that's political, I'm not going to deal with it, we're just going to be nice. Well, we can be nice and be really ill-equipped and lose our voice.
Yeah, we can. And I think some of the biggest issues that are going to come up, they're already coming up, obviously, is if there's a good God, why is there evil? Why is there a pandemic? Why is there sickness? Why is there death? At times like this, people ask those questions, and if there is a God, is he judging us? What's all this about? So definitely that's one of the questions we need to deal with. I think another question we need to deal with is the issue of justice at all, because people are talking a lot about justice. Well, where does justice come from? Who gets to define justice, right? Who gets to define rights? Because if there is no God, there is no justice. There are no rights. Everything's just a matter of opinion. We're back to what we started with. It's just all about power. Whoever has the most power gets to define what justice is. When in reality, that's not the way it should be. The way it should be is there's a moral standard out there, which is God's nature, and we operate on principle. And our founding began on principle. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted among men not to give these rights, not to take away these rights, but to secure these rights. And as you know, the Declaration went on to say that if a government doesn't secure rights of individuals, again, the government doesn't give you your rights, the government just protects them. If it fails to do that, then the people have the authority and the right to get a new government, to put a new government in place. And that's what the Declaration of Independence was all about. So we're going to either operate on principle or power. And we've got to show them why principle is the right and better way of doing things. And justice comes from God, his nature, and any deviation from his nature would be what we would call evil.
Have you had a chance to read Dinesh D'Souza's newest book, The United States of Socialism?
Not yet. No. What did he say in there?
Yeah, well, you would appreciate it. I mean, Dinesh is he's a gifted thinker, but he was just kind of, giving the warning, the harrowing warning of the imminent danger of what is emerging right before our very eyes. The church is losing its voice. We're living in a cancel culture right now. This is a time for us to find some Christian boldness. I think of J.I. Packer. He's just passed away, and he talked about, like, in his book, like knowing God, some of the characteristics of somebody who knows God. They have great thoughts about God. They have great energy for God. They have great convictions, and they have great boldness. And that boldness, Frank, how do we get that? Because you think about this, I think the church, there's been a lot of coming out of the closet in our culture, but I think the church is in the closet. How does the church come out of the closet?
I think we need bold leaders, because once one leader stands up, then others go, oh, I guess I can do that, right? Because courage breeds more courage. So you got people like Jack Hibbs standing up. He's one leader that won't back down. I hear people like Vody Balkum, who does kind of the same thing. I don't know if you know who Vody is. Yep. I hear those are the two that come to mind right off the bat. I don't actually listen to a lot of preachers, just a few of them. So I don't follow a lot of them. But those are the kind of people that are going to stand up and say, we need to speak up because we actually have the answer to all this. We have the answer to injustice. We have the answer to evil. We have in fact, Christianity, the whole story of Christianity is the answer to evil. We have the ability to fill that void that everyone is experiencing. As Augustine said, our hearts are restless until we find our rest in thee, God. So we have that ability to lead people to the truth. And if we're not going to stand up and speak the truth, who is?
So as we're talking, maybe a couple of the themes that are emerging in answer to the question that we set out at the beginning, why is apologetics more important now than ever before? And I think one thing that we're discussing is because we're politically compromised. And as a result of being politically compromised, we're at risk of even becoming more muted. And that's really problematic. Can you think of any other reasons why apologetics is so important for such a time as this, Frank?
Well, a lot of people here are going to send your child off to college if they do have college. It might be online college, but actually, let me say something, Bobby. I think online college might be better for young people than in-person college because there is so much nonsense and so much political correctness on so many college campuses that young people have to navigate when they get there. It might be better just to stay at home and do a Zoom meeting and just have the instructor teach in class. But I will say this, young people who go off to college, 3 out of 4 of them are going to walk away from the church once they go to college. And one of the major reasons they do is intellectually they don't know why Christianity is true because we've never told them why it's true. Most churches don't deal in apologetics. I get it. The pastor's got 1,000,001 things to do, and seminaries rarely teach apologetics, although more are doing it now. But we've got to start giving young people evidence because the easiest way to get picked off in a war is to not know you're in a war and to go to a place unprepared to take fire. And when you go to a college campus, you're going to take fire against the Christian worldview. So you've got to be ready with answers. You've got to be ready with reasons why you believe what you believe. And that's one of the reasons the 1 Minute Apologist is important. That's one of the reasons our website, Cross-Examine, is important, because we're trying to give people answers to deal with the questions and objections they're going to get to the Christian faith. And look, if Christianity is true, and you and I both believe it is, we think there's evidence, good evidence for it. If it's true, it's the most important fact in the world. As C.S. Lewis said, if it's not true, it's irrelevant. What it can't be is moderately important. And so if it's really true, we've got to do a much better job of convincing people why it's true, so they're not going to be swayed by these alternate ideologies that are going to be thrown at them consistently, particularly on one of the most leftist atheistic places in America, and that is the United States college campus.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness, that is so well put, Frank. I mean, you think about people spending $70,000 a year, and they're just being indoctrinated into some kind of a far left, agenda, and they're not really able to think. They've just been pre-programmed. They've been indoctrinated. I suppose a question that might be worth asking that our listeners could maybe even be wondering about. We're talking about maybe like, why is apologetics more important now than ever before? But maybe even asking, why is apologetics important to begin with, and what are the major apologetic issues of our day?
Yeah, there's 4 apologetic issues that I try and go through on a college campus, and they're from our book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. There are 4 questions that need to be asked, and then there are 4 categories of objections that need to be answered. So to sum up 90% of what you need to know, here it is. You need to be able to answer the question, does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament reliable enough to tell us the truth about the resurrection? Because if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible and Jesus really rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Because if Jesus is risen from the dead, then he's God, and whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament, and he promised the New Testament. So the key to the entire thing is the resurrection of Jesus. If Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity's true. So we go through those 4 questions on a college campus. We go through it in a church when we do it at a church, or we go to a high school campus. You can see some of these presentations on our YouTube channel. We put the whole thing up there. We stream every one we do live. And so you'll see University of Nebraska, I just did a few months ago, Ohio State. You can see them all on our YouTube channel, and all the Q&A as well. Now, there are 4 categories of objections you're going to get when you try and say Christianity's true. They all begin with the letter E, and these are all in our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. You're going to get questions on evil. If there's a good God, why is there evil? Or why did God kill the Canaanites in the Old Testament? Those kinds of questions. Mm-hmm. You're going to get questions on ethics, which is very big today. Obviously, questions on LGBTQ stuff, or premarital sex, or even why did God kill the Canaanites, in the Old Testament is also an ethical question, right? You're going to get questions on, or slavery, that kind of thing. That's a question as well. You're going to get questions on evolution. Some people falsely think that if evolution is true, Christianity's false. That's not true. But you're going to get questions on that. And then you're going to get questions on eternity. Like, what about those that have never heard? Or why did God create people he knew would go to hell? Or would God send me to hell just because I don't believe in Jesus? These are the big questions that you get over and over again. So if you can show that truth exists, God exists, miracles are possible, and Jesus rose from the dead, and you can deal with evil, ethics, evolution, and eternity, then 90% of what you need to know, you'll know. And most of that is on this app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store.
Yeah, I really want to encourage people to go and subscribe, like, and share for Frank's YouTube channel, and also make sure that you get that app, check out his website. And my guest is Frank Turek, the great Dr. Frank Turek, author, speaker, radio host. Frank, one of the things that does concern me when you bring up college kids, because I think that those examples that you gave were fantastic. I mean, just being equipped as students with that gives you so much more confidence. And one of the reasons I think we lack boldness is because we lack confidence, and we lack confidence because we lack content.
Right.
And we don't give people the content of a Christian worldview. I think about how important it should be for pastors and student pastors and children's pastors to be giving kids and students and adults a Christian worldview. I think that we get so superficial. We think church is getting a little bit of a spiritual, emotional buzz, and it's like Love Boat Christianity. It's Candyland Christianity. It's some cheesianity, and we have to think. We have to really formulate some stuff because ideas have consequences.
Oh, absolutely. And you can see today the reason the church is, or the country's a mess, is because the church has really fumbled its ability to defend the truth from 100 years ago with the fundamentalist movement in the 1920s. That's why we are where we are now. It's because the church checked out of society 100 years ago. All the godly people got out, and then you wonder why the culture goes godless. It's our fault. In fact, I wrote a column on our website like 11 years ago, and it's still, I could have written it yesterday. The title of it is "Country a Mess, Blame the Church." We're to blame. We're the ones. Look, I'm not faulting people who are progressive or leftist or liberal for putting forth their point of view. They may honestly think it's the true point of view. I'm faulting the Christians for not putting forth what I think is the true worldview and what is the right political system under which we ought to live. We haven't put forth a good enough argument. And now we're getting to the point where arguments don't matter because the other side is just going to cancel any argument. By the way, let me say one thing about socialism. Socialism fails everywhere it's tried because it's a misunderstanding of human nature. You can't just decide that people don't need to work and they're going to be motivated. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. In fact, here's an easy way of pointing this out. I always ask people, when was the last time you washed a rental car? You've never washed a rental car. Why? Because you don't own it, right?
Right.
You don't own it. You don't really care about it, right? And William Bradford, who started our country, or in Pilgrims, came up with the Pilgrims, when he did a community field to try and grow crops and said everybody's gonna just get an equal amount. Nobody wanted to farm the thing. They didn't have enough food. And then he said, well, this isn't working. We got too many free riders here. Let's give everybody a piece of land and they can keep the fruits of their labor. They had plenty of food then, right? If you can't keep the fruits of your labor, you are not going to be very motivated. And so ownership is important. You need to have private property. And by the way, the 10 Commandments implies private property, right? Thou shalt not steal implies private property. You can't steal something if it's community property. So the best way to lift more people out of poverty is with capitalism, regulated capitalism. And that's what we're supposed to have in this country. Now, can we improve our system? Of course. It was Winston Churchill who said, capitalism is the worst system out there except for all the others.
Yeah, exactly. We await our utopian vision. I love the words of Jesus in a Sermon on the Mount where he says, you are the salt of the earth. And we think about, okay, what's this salt metaphor? And, some would say, okay, it's a thirst enhancer, salt makes you thirsty. What's that?
It's also an irritant.
It's salt's an irritant. It helps flavor things up, but a preservative.
Yeah.
And so you think about the way salt was used in the ancient world. For example, like in Galilee, they would fish there along the sea, catch tilapia, which was the fish that was primarily in there, and then they would pack it in salt, and they would then export it from Galilee, let's say, to Jerusalem, and the salt getting packed up against the fish. Well, the reason the fish could, not decay is because it was packed up with salt. Now you think of Jesus saying, "You're the salt of the earth," and as if he's saying, you need to go pack yourself up against a decaying culture. And I think, I feel like we're a little bit kind of separatist sometimes in culture. It's like we're either immersionists, we totally get immersed, or we're separatists. How are we then as Christians to kind of have a cultural vision of preserving it?
Well, that's really what conservative means. When you say you're a conservative, what you're trying to conserve is what you know is true. Now, it doesn't mean you can't progress in areas where you haven't progressed far enough, right? But what you want to do as a conservative is conserve what you know is true. And there are many things we know are true, like all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and we're all made in the image of God. You want to know what the answer to racism is? Christianity. Why? Because we know it's true that people are made in the image of God. And there's not slave nor free. There's neither Jew nor Gentile. There's neither man nor woman, male nor female, right? We're all one in the image of God. There's one race, the human race. Christianity is the only worldview that's going to eradicate racism. because look, the other worldviews can't do it. What? Hinduism can't do it. The whole thing is a caste system, right? Hinduism isn't going to erase racism. Islam isn't. If you're not a Muslim, you're a second-class citizen. Atheism isn't going to do it because it's only the people in power that are going to dictate who has what and who doesn't. You know, we're just molecular machines in atheism. There is no transcendental value. There's nothing special about human beings. The only worldview that's going to ensure human rights is Christianity. And so that's what we need to do. We need to put forth that fact, and we need to do it boldly because it's true.
Yeah. I think it's my apologies. I'm getting distracted here. I'm hearing noises in the background, and so I'm sending a text going, "Hey, like the joy of not having your own space, right? I'm so stoked. I'm going to have my own podcast studio coming up pretty soon here. But for right now, I'm doing it in a house, and I'm hearing noises outside of there. So getting a little distracted. But
just as long as there are really noises out there, Bobby, and you're not just hearing it.
I know. Hey, I wouldn't put it past me, bro. I wouldn't put it past me. You know, you did mention, though, Frank, talking about like colleges and universities, and, you know, you just think about like how far we've come, right? I mean, many of the great universities were Christian in origin, and now today we see a decaying that's taking place. It's not being preserved. The concern for our emerging culture, I think when we talk about why is apologetics more important now than ever before, how does that connect then to the parents at home needing to equip their kids? Because it's like, yeah, they're going to go off to college. But my fear is in a soundbite culture, many of the millennials, they're watching social media, they're forming opinions on sound bites, and they're not able to think. Like even a lot of these people going out rallying and stuff, I don't even think they know what the heck they're rallying for and understanding it. So how much does this fall back on some of the parents to really take some parental control in giving their kids a worldview? And frankly, I think sometimes parents just don't have the worldview and they don't know where to begin. Yeah,
that's why as parents, we should all be reading children's books because we learn from them. Children's apologetics books, right? Like, or children's books on the nature of God. You know, William Lane Craig has those books on the nature of God, which are for like 5-year-olds, and parents are reading them going, wow, I didn't know that. That's what we ought to be doing. We ought to be reading those. And we ought to start very young because most worldviews are pretty much set by the age of 12. All right. So we have to start very young. In fact, we're developing an elementary school apologetics program for kids right now. And of course, our mutual friend, Jay Warner Wallace, you know, he puts out these little books like Cold Case Christianity for Kids. Mm-hmm. These are the places we need to start very early with young people. And we have to be a place where parents say to their kids, you can talk to me about anything.
Yeah.
Because if not, the kids are going to go to their friends rather than their parents. In fact, my wife was so good at this. You know, our kids are grown now, but we used to talk about everything with the kids. You know, we would talk about sex over the dinner table and what it was all about, and you know what was right about it, and what, you know, where you're supposed to have it and when not. And can you imagine a young kid comes to their parents and asks a question about sex, and the parent freaks out? Well, what? Is that kid going to ever come back to the parent with a question like that again?
Yeah.
You know, and my wife, she used to say this to our kids. Like, she'd say, we had all boys. So she would say, hey, boys, let me tell you something. You have sex with a young girl out of wedlock, and that girl gets pregnant. You have given permission to that young girl to kill your baby. It's true. By the way, that even goes for married couples now, right? According to our abortion laws, if a woman wants an abortion, not even the father can do anything about it. But that's just the truth. And we need to point that out. We need to talk about these hard issues. We need to talk about the LGBTQ issues. We need to talk about until very recently, the cultural issue was the issue of sex. Now it's kind of transitioned into racism and all that due to these terrible events that have occurred in the past few months. But I still submit to you that the country's #1 religion is still the religion of sex. Just about everything that politicians argue over when it comes to cultural issues, sex, abortion, marriage, transgenderism. We even argue over about what bathrooms we ought to use. I mean, come on.
It's not that complicated.
Is it, right? But those are the real issues that we need to be talking about with our kids, because those are the issues that are going to pull them away from Christianity, because they think it's loving to approve of everything. I just did a talk at Jack Hibbs' church a few months ago called "Does Love Require Approval?" The answer is no. And every parent knows this. Parents, if you approve of everything your kid wants to do, you're not loving. You're unloving. You can't approve of everything your kid wants to do. You want to love your kid, you've got to stand in the way of evil, even if that kid hates you for it, because that's what parents do. That's what a loving person does. So the left wants to say, if you love me, you'll approve of everything we do. And we're going to say, no, because we love you, we're not going to approve of everything you do, because we love you.
Yeah, it's as if people get this picture of God, like God, he doesn't really care about our sex life. He doesn't care how many people we have sex with. Mm-hmm. And, this is where we're creating God in our own image, because it doesn't take much for us to infer that, you know what, we don't want our spouse having sex with whoever they feel like.
Right. Yeah.
So why in the world would God want us having sex with whoever we feel like? So it's like we get the violation principle there in the context of a marriage, what that would feel like. But then when it comes to God, he doesn't seem to care. So, we're moral enough to care in the context of marriage, of not wanting our spouse to sleep with everybody, but God's so immoral, he doesn't care.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point, Bob. I hadn't thought of that. The other thing that I think we need to say, too, with regard to this issue, because our culture treats sex like it's just physical. On one hand, they do, and on the other hand, they don't. But obviously, sex is not just physical, because if it was just physical, why is it worse that if somebody rapes you than if somebody just physically assaults you? Right? If sex is just physical, why is pedophilia wrong? Mm-hmm. It's just physical, right? Or if sex is just physical, why is it that if your spouse goes off, as you just said, and has a sexual relationship with somebody else, you don't go, oh, that's just physical? No, it's not just physical. It's moral, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's psychological. There's so much more to sex than just the physical. In fact, sex is like fire. You put fire in your fireplace, it's wonderful, it'll warm you. You get it anywhere else in your house, it will burn your house down. Maybe not immediately, but over the long term it will. And everybody who's watching us right now who's over the age of 40 knows what we're talking about, because most of us have tried it ourselves, right? We've tried to do whatever we want sexually, and we realize our house gets burnt down.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hey, I didn't hear the gospel till I was 19, and I lived very promiscuous and partying. And see, my moral philosophy as a teenager would be, if it feels good, then it's true. I just that was kind of how I went after it. But
right.
Lord knows, I mean, there's lots of things that feel good that are horrible for you. It feels good to inject heroin in your veins.
Yeah.
But it's not good for you.
No, not at all. There's a lot of things that feel good that aren't good for you. And so we need to point that out to young people. It's not just physical. There's so much more to it. And I've just seen too many lives ruined by it. And I mentioned earlier that the culture is schizophrenic on this, because on one hand, they say it's just physical. On another hand, they don't. You say, how don't they? Well, the whole Me Too movement, right? Mm-hmm. If sex is just physical, what's the big deal, right?
Yeah.
Because we know it's not just physical. So on one hand, we want it to be just physical. On the other hand, we go, man, if you even say anything suggestive to me, that's going to offend me. And by the way, you notice that's not even physical, but you're being psychologically offended, and that's a problem for you. Well, wait a minute. Look, if it's just physical, it can't be even psychologically offending now, can it be?
Well, your whole point too a little bit ago about, this idea of we don't have to believe in what people are doing to like people and my fear is that's the way the narrative's getting pushed toward us as Christians right now. We don't accept you unless we agree with you. But that just seems like a false dichotomy right there, because it's very possible for us as human beings. It's what makes our nation supposedly so great the way it's supposed to function is that you have a bunch of people that don't agree with each other, but we can still accept one another. We can still exist together. But now it seems as if we're forcing people to agree with a particular narrative. And if you don't agree with that particular narrative, then you don't accept us, and therefore we don't accept you either. We cancel you out.
Well, isn't it interesting, though? I had this week, Michael Brown and I, who's a wonderful Messianic Jewish man here in Charlotte, we had a debate at our seminary, Southern Evangelical Seminary, a couple of years ago with a couple of folks from the LGBTQ community. One of them was a pastor. And the title was something like, does love require approval? Or does love require affirmation? And they were saying, yes, it does. And we, of course, were saying, no, it doesn't, that you can love somebody and not approve of what they do. Because we know this as parents, right, as I mentioned earlier. So at one point in the debate, I turned to our opponents. I said, do you love us? And they said, yes. And I said, do you approve of our position? And they said, no. I said, well, you just lost the debate. That's our position, right? Because you don't approve of, you're saying you love us and you don't approve our position. Well, we're saying the same thing to you. We love you, but we don't approve your position. Now, maybe you have reasons, and maybe we have reasons. So instead of resorting to power, let's just look at the reasons here and then figure out who's right. And at one point, I asked the other person, I said, if God truly wants you to have sex only in a marriage between a man and a woman, in other words, if homosexual sexual relations were prohibited by God, would you agree with him? And an answer. Because the answer is no.
In other words, if homosexual sexual relations were
something happened on this side. Hold on. I'm hearing an echo, Bobby. Are you?
Frank, you've just duplicated yourself, bro.
I heard an echo. What's going on here? That was God. That was God reiterating what I said, Bobby.
He wanted
no, it wasn't. I get it.
He wanted to reinforce that masterful point that you just got eloquent on.
No,
but hey, seriously, that's a good point. I mean, let's ask that question. Like, okay, then let's say for hypothetical purposes, if God did prohibit it, then would you, what would you think about God? And you can really start getting to the motives of some things.
Right. No, always asking that question. I think it's like asking if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Doesn't matter how much evidence I give you, you're not going to say yes. So what's the point? Let's just go have pizza. Right.
And if God's against marriage outside of a heterosexual context, there are going to be some people that are just never going to want that kind of a God.
I know. Yeah, it's really a matter. And by the way, to a certain extent, Bobby, this is comforting to me rather than distressing. I mean, it's distressing on one hand. It's comforting in another hand. Why? The reason it's comforting to me is that despite the fact that you and I are apologists and we spend a lot of time trying to show people why it's true, for many people who are not Christians, they're not searching for truth. They don't want it to be true. And it's not like God isn't giving them enough evidence. They don't want the evidence. They don't want it to be true. They're turning away from the evidence they already have. That's why they can get mad when you bring them more evidence. If somebody turns away from a dim light, if you shine a flashlight in their eyes, they're going to get more annoyed. And sometimes that's what happens. People get more annoyed because you're bringing up evidence that they don't want to hear. So God is fair. God is giving us adequate evidence to allow us to know he's real. But he's also not overpowering us with evidence, so we can be allowed to go our own way and truly have free will and say, no, God, I don't want you.
So let me try to, before we bring Tim in, to kind of look at a few questions that the audience might have to try to put together some of the themes that I think that we've discussed. We organically have kind of set out to answer the question, why is apologetics more important now than ever? I think some of the issues that emerge in our conversation is we talked about how we are politically compromised in our culture right now, that we're at risk of being canceled because the church has been missionally mute for too long, because the church is inept and hasn't equipped itself to defend and articulate the faith, because we've got no longer share the same values that the culture has, The culture doesn't share that with us. And so therefore, we're saying we need to wise up. We need to, on all levels, helping kids to understand stuff, students to understand stuff, parents to understand stuff, pastors to understand stuff. We need to start equipping people with the Christian worldview. I think that's kind of what we've talked about here. Is there anything that you feel like you'd want to add to maybe the narrative that we're trying to just throw out there? Or is there anything else that maybe I failed to mention before we open it up for questions, Frank?
Yeah, I think we have to say that it's difficult for the heart to rejoice in what the mind doubts. So people who are getting all sorts of different messages that are anti-Christian are not going to be able to withstand the barrage unless they have good evidence that Christianity is true. They're not going to be able to feel the joy of Christ if they're always doubting that it's true. And so we have to give them reasons why it's true, if in fact they're open to reasons. And the best time to get answers is before you start seeking them, right? Mm-hmm. The best time to get a friend is before you need one, right? So right. If you're going to go through a difficult time, it's best to have an answer to the question, if God, why evil? Then before you get into that evil period. Like, my dad just died a few weeks ago. And so I already thought about all these questions about if God, why evil, and all this, and why do people die, and and so when the difficult time came, okay, this is part of life. He's going to die and go on and be with Jesus. All right, I can deal with it a lot better now that I'm going, oh God, where are you, and all this. So yeah. I think the time to get answers is before you need them.
Yeah. And my condolences, Frank. I didn't know you recently lost your dad. I know that is still, even with our Christian worldview, it's never easy to lose a loved one. But you're right. When you do have a perspective that you've pre-thought through, it gives you hope. I think your statement was just very insightful and so true. It's hard to rejoice in what the heart doubts. And I know, even as one who was hammered by doubts, and I talked to you about some of my doubts while I was even in the midst of it, Frank, and God would bring me through that season of doubts. But you know what? Doubts will sap you of your joy. It will really run you down. And so apologetics can help doubters to find their way out of that dark night of the soul. Apologetics can help eliminate the obstacles that the non-believer has that are getting in the way of them believing. Apologetics can help you to be more informed in your evangelistic endeavors.
Right.
Well, Frank, thank you so much. I want to ask Tim to come on in and talk with us for a little bit. Tim Holt's the executive producer at 1 Minute Apologist. And we've just went on a new platform tonight on Skype. And so I can't see the comments. But Tim can, and he knows kind of what's going down in the midst of our conversation. And I thought it would be good to bring him in to kind of interrogate Frank a little bit with some of the audience's questions.
I love interrogating Frank. Yeah, so we've had some really great questions. One of the ones that I wanted to start with is, what would both of you, and I know, Bobby, you kind of said that you want to teach the issues, not the party, and I think that's a really kind of great sentiment to kind of just, really launch things off. But if you were talking to someone that was going to vote Democrat, where would you kind of start that conversation with both of them? So, Frank, we'll start with you, and then Bobby, maybe we'll get your insight into that question as well.
Yeah, I would say look at the platforms. Look at both party platforms. Because let's be honest, in the United States of America, at this point, it's either going to be a Republican or a Democrat that's going to be president. There's not going to be some third party at this point, okay? So you've got two choices. In this election, it's going to be Trump or Biden. That's it, okay? I wish we had different choices, but we don't. So what you're going to have to now do is you're going to have to look at the platforms. You got Trump's record. You got Biden's record. Biden's been in Washington a lot, even longer than Trump. And you can see where they stand and where they're heading. And personally, for me, when I look at the Democratic platform, I'm horrified. Just being honest with you. I mean, it is the most anti-biblical platform than it's ever been. Not to say the Republicans are a walk in the park, but in this case, it seems to me the Republicans are the least worst choice, okay? We got two pretty bad choices, but the Republicans especially are the least worst choice, and that's typically what happens in an election. In fact, Dr. Norman Geisler, our mutual friend who passed away last year, Bobby, used to have a saying, and this was before the 2016 election. He said, just about every election is a choice between a known witch and a suspected devil.
Mm.
It was
like Dr. G.
Correct in 2016, if you know what I mean. But he said that long before 2016. You just have to look at the platforms and see where people are going to go. And as I said before, it's not our salvation, but politics is important because politics affects our ability to preach and live the gospel, as we talked about earlier. And that is very important. And it seems to me the Democratic platform is going to take away a lot of religious freedom. And I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about their stance on life, obviously. I'm concerned about their stance on so many issues. Marxism is another issue. Identity politics is another issue. We shouldn't be dividing people by these ethnicities. As I mentioned earlier, there's one race, the human race. Yeah. And we ought to be just saying everybody's made in the image of God, and we ought to treat everybody that way, regardless of what you think politically.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, Bobby, let me say one thing. I see people talk. Why are we talking about politics? We just explained why we're talking about politics. Because it affects. I was
just going to say that, yeah.
To even have this conversation right now. You can't have this conversation in China. You can't have this conversation in North Korea. You can't preach the gospel in these places. Wake up, people. Sorry.
No, I think that, listen, my heart, as I mentioned, as a pastor, was always to just, I didn't mention parties because I just wanted everybody to be as welcome as possible because I knew that the big dividing issue is going to be the gospel. And that's the stumbling block. I will say that as I think about where we are today, statements like, why are we talking about politics? Why are we talking about politics? Well, it doesn't take a genius right now for us to look at the news and realize how much we are being politically affected right now as a culture. Like, do I think COVID-19 is a real issue? Yeah, I think it's a real issue. But do I think it's being politicized? Absolutely. I think it's really being politicized. So I think it is real, but I think it's being politicized. And so when I think of both sides, I think that, hey, there is no perfect candidate. That's for sure. William Lane Craig recently, I heard him talking about how when it comes to a particular candidate, hey, it would be great if the person had the character that you wanted, but what you're voting for is their policies. What policies are they promising to uphold? And the policies that I see that Biden would uphold is going to be a complete overturning of our country. It's going to be reinforcing LGBTQ. It's going to be reinforcing critical race theory. It's going to be, it's going to be on a Marxist track. It's going to be pro-death with abortion. And so when I think about the Bible, then it doesn't take much for us to stop and look and go, look, I might not like this particular candidate either, but which person is going to enforce policies that are going to help preserve culture the best that would look most like the Bible? Now, I get it. We as a church have the biggest role to play, and we need to step up. We need to get involved. We need to get engaged. But that doesn't mean we need to be passive as it relates to politics. I think at times in the past, I was probably more passive than I should have been. And this is coming from a guy who served as a lead pastor. And it was because I think that many pastors will stay. It felt appropriate at the time, but ever since, there's been so much decline in the last several years, Frank, that it doesn't feel quite as appropriate. There was a time where the left and the right, they were different, obviously, but it wasn't as overwhelming. Now it's becoming so overwhelming that I think pastors who are being passive, they won't be being passive when we look like a country that has been completely silenced. But then I fear it'll be too late, and that's why I'm speaking up.
Yeah. Remember that old quote from Martin Niemöller, I think it was, Bobby? I can't remember it exactly, but this was in Nazi Germany where, first they came for the social. Then they came for the unionists, and then they came for the Jews, and then they came for the homosexuals, and then they came for the gypsies, and then they came for and by the time they came to me, there was nobody left to defend me, right? Because I didn't help any of those other people.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of where we're heading.
Yeah.
And I think I see people on this thread going, we just got to preach the gospel and all this, and the gospel. The gospel is the answer, but as we said earlier, you can't preach the gospel unless they give you political freedom. You can't do it legally anyway, and it's much easier to do it legally than it is illegally. And your point about policies is critical as well, Bobby, because I wish we had kind of a Billy Graham character as the president. We don't, okay? And when people ask me about Trump, I say, look, I give him an A- on policy and a D on demeanor, okay? I wish his demeanor was better, but if I had to pick one or the other, I'd pick policies. That's why you put a guy in. I'd prefer to have a guy who has an A on both. But we haven't seen that guy yet, okay?
Right.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? You're going to have to pick one or the other, and everyone's going to have to make an informed choice. Look at the party platforms and see where they're going, because the truth of the matter is, Bobby, when it comes to our Congress, members of Congress vote with their party more than 90% of the time. So whatever leaders put up, like it's Nancy Pelosi in the House and it's Mitch McConnell in the Senate, whatever the leaders want to put forward, that's what they're going to vote on.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I just would want to say, Tim, before you take us to another question or make a comment, is this. The statement, if we got to think about the statement, just preach the gospel. Well, that would assume, so everybody gets to do politics except the person who believes in the gospel.
Right. Only atheists can run the country. Only atheists can run the country, Bobby. Come on.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, we need to expose that, because it's such a cliche statement. Like, only preach the gospel. We don't need to be involved in politics to go, okay, so if I'm born again, if I'm a Christian and I believe in the gospel, only those who believe in the gospel should not be involved in politics. Well, guess what? That's exactly what the cancel culture would love for us to believe.
And that's exactly how our country wouldn't have begun, because most of the founders were Christians. You wouldn't even have America if these guys hadn't gone on pop. Bobby, that's another thing. I know we're going on and on about this. We have to say one other thing.
Good question, Tim.
Sorry, Tim, get out of here. There's one other thing we have to say, and it goes like this. Christians erroneously think that they can separate their lives as part sacred, part secular.
Yes.
And since politics is secular, we can't be involved in that. Yeah. That's not the Christian worldview. The Christian worldview is you take your faith and your beliefs everywhere, in politics, in business, in recreation, in law, in wherever you are. You take who you are as a Christian everywhere. And people say, well, you can't impose your religious values on people. We're not imposing our religious values. We're not trying to tell people how or when, or where, if to worship. We're not trying to legislate religion. We're trying to legislate morality, and that's what everybody's trying to do. And the only question is, whose morality should we legislate? And the answer is, we shouldn't legislate my morality or your morality. We ought to legislate the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident, which comes from God.
And for more on that, you should read Frank's book about that subject, which is
morality.
a really great book on that. So
Francis Schaeffer and Nancy Pearcey, I think people should read, because that's that secular spiritual split, the two-story living, and those authors will really help people there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Nancy Pearcey was on the show last week, so if you're checking this out, you can find a long interview with Nancy Pearcey talking about Love Thy Body and some of the Supreme Court decisions that were recently done, and all of that. So I want to go from...
Hey, Bobby, who's this guy Tim Hull interrupting us? What is going on here?
I want to go from governmental politics to church politics. So before we do that, I just want to say, Terry,
involved in church politics, whatever you do.
Yeah, Terry Robertson, you have a great question, and I'm going to get to it next. So just hang in there. Right. You've had some really awesome questions. But Jonathan asked this question: why do you think that churches aren't investing more in apologetics? Do you think it's that they don't believe it's not important enough, or do you think that they don't have answers to those questions themselves, and so they just tend to avoid it, or something else? So that was a question from Jonathan. Why do you think pastors aren't engaging in apologetics more?
Bobby, you were a pastor. Take a shot, man. What do you think?
Well, I think one thing, Frank and Tim, that leads to this line of thinking is there is a picture of apologetics that people have in their mind of one who is arrogant, overly black and white, condescending, self-righteous, dying on 1,000 hills. But the thing that I can say is, while that may have been true in times past, and while that might be true with some people, I can say, and I think Frank would say the same thing. We both know, the most well-known apologists in the world. We've had the privilege of interacting with, and these are some of the greatest, most delightful, humble, kind people that you'll ever meet, that genuinely have a beautiful Christian worldview. So I think that it's also been, so that's one reason. I think people fear that it's kind of too academic for their flocks to handle. And I think what happens is honestly, you got to wonder on the diet that the flocks are being fed, why the pastor ever needed to go to seminary to begin with. Mm-hmm. He went there to train and equip the flock for the work of ministry. And I think we've got to realize that, yes, we want people to know how to relate well and feel good. But, informing the worldview takes some thinking. And so it just takes some time. And, you can have a good spiritual buzz or a good emotional moment. And, hey, that feels great on the spot. It takes some brain work and some gymnastics. But listen, I can be the guy to say, I failed the ASVAB to get into the United States Army 3 times when I was a kid. That's how uneducated I was when I came to the Lord. So for those that think, oh man, it is just hard. You don't get it. You're an apologist. You're an academic. Well, I wasn't always that way. I fell in love with God. And that's why I fell in love with reading, because reading was the way that I could know my God. And those would just be a couple thoughts that I would have. What about you, Frank?
Yeah, I was going to say, you can't be a leader unless you're a reader, because you can only learn from your own experience or somebody else's. And you don't have enough time to learn from your own experience. So you have to read. I think part of the problem, too, Bobby, is that most seminaries are still teaching their students to preach to a world that existed 60 years ago.
So
right?
True.
It's just all about how to interpret the Bible, which is critically important. But what if people don't believe in the Bible? What do you do then, right?
Exactly.
You've got to give them reasons to believe in the Bible, and you've got to give them a way to interact with issues that come up in society, because that's what's on people's minds. I know on our podcast and our live streams, when the whole COVID thing happened, I did like 2 or 3 shows on it. When the George Floyd and all the racism, I did 2 or 3 shows on it. Why? Even though I'm doing mostly apologetics, I'm applying those apologetic principles to those issues, because that's what's on people's minds. They want to know how their faith interacts with the rest of the world. Right. And if they're standing by the coffee machine at work and some guy goes, Bible's been changed throughout the centuries, how could you believe that nonsense? What are you going to say? You've got to have some reasons to, or at least some questions to come back at the individual and have a true conversation with him. And, our mutual friend Greg Kokel says sometimes you don't even have to know anything. You just need to ask questions. Bible's been changed throughout the centuries. What do you mean by that?
That's right.
How'd you come to that conclusion? Have you studied the manuscript evidence for yourself? How many people are going to go, yeah, just last night I was up reading a book about the Byzantine line of manuscripts. No, nobody's going to say that, right? The truth is
about P46 and its reliability.
Right.
The truth is they just heard a slogan and they like the slogan. And you can point that out by just asking a couple of questions, right? You don't even have to know anything. And so sometimes just equipping people with questions, like our friend Greg does in his book Tactics, right there, that can help you as well. And by the way, these questions are also in our app, the Cross-Examined app. Have I mentioned the Cross-Examined app like 12 times so far? 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined.
Did you get your quotas in for this last hour?
Cross-Examined. Aren't I like the guy like at NASCAR? When they do the NASCAR interview after the race, he's got to have his hat on. And there's always a guy behind him with another hat who's like trying to get that hat in. Like he's trying to make sure that you can see the hat in the. Sorry, I
just want to apologize to our audience. I know
like
you expect more.
Just trying to get this logo in.
Yeah. Well, listen. Frank Turek's having a bit of a meltdown before us, and so just forgive him and all that. And Tim, you might need to come in and rescue Frank.
That's right.
Well, before we get to this last question here, and again, thank you, Frank, so much for your insight.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bobby, for taking the time and kind of laying out some of these, arguments and reasons why apologetics is so important. Before we get to this last question, I just want to remind everybody that you can take out your phone. If you're watching this on your computer or on a TV, you can click on the QR code, which is right above me, right here, and just scan that QR code. It'll take you right to our YouTube page, and you can go ahead and subscribe just like that. So this last question I thought was really important from Terry. She asked, where should I begin sharing the gospel and witnessing to my family? So there's some interesting family dynamics that we need to kind of take into consideration. This isn't the person at the service station. It's not necessarily maybe just a coworker that you're going to see just at work, and you can kind of avoid them if it gets awkward. But these are your family. These are people you see often. Maybe they live in the same house as you. So what sort of things do we need to keep in mind as we go on that journey?
Well, first of all, you have to stop being a jerk. That's the hardest thing, I think, right? Because they're who you are, right?
That's right.
But Bobby, I don't know about you, but the family's the hardest, quite obviously, because they know you're a jerk. We're all jerks, right?
Yeah.
We have a fallen nature. But I think also you just need to ask a lot of questions. And you need to really try and figure out where that other person's coming from and why they believe what they believe. Before they're going to be interested in anything you have to say, you have to learn enough about what they think and why they think it. That's why those tactical questions are so important. Why do you think that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? Or what do you mean by that? Or questions like, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I love another question that Greg has, and this is a question that you can ask when somebody asks you a question about a controversial subject, maybe a political issue. You can ask the question, do you consider yourself a tolerant person? And the other person is going to probably say, well, of course I'm tolerant. And then you can say, great, because if I offer an opinion that differs with you, you'll tolerate it then, right? They're not going to get all mad at you. That's the whole point of tolerance, right? So I think asking questions is how you open up the opportunity to then present what you believe, rather than just trying to force feed what you believe on somebody. I think if you ask enough questions about what they believe and get them to maybe start doubting what they believe, then maybe they'll be open to what you believe.
I do think as well, when you're a new Christian and you're in a family context, it's easy to get morally frustrated at your family members because a new Christian's a bit of a zealot. And so they're wanting everybody to hurry up and get saved. And we can lose sight of the fact that it took time for us as well. And we had our own questions. And the Bible says in the book of Jude, be merciful to those who doubt. And so if somebody has doubt, be merciful. And I think what Frank's saying is absolutely right. I mean, we want to know kind of, what are the things that are getting in the way of them becoming a Christian? So they know that you're a Christian. Okay, what would stop you from becoming a Christian? What gets in the way of you becoming a Christian? Well, I don't like this about Christianity or this about Christianity. Some of those things might be real issues that they need to just learn to embrace about Christianity. Or it might be things that are just caricatures of Christianity, and you can clean that up. I would say lastly, you can try to figure out, I put together an acrostic a long time ago called assess. And how do you assess where somebody's at? Are they kind of at the antagonistic stage? Are they at the seeker stage? Are they at the sensitive stage? Are they the evaluating stage, the E? That's where they're evaluating the difference between you and them. Are they at the seeing stage, right? They see it, but you can see it, but still you got to get to the submitting stage. And so depending upon if somebody's antagonistic toward the gospel, you're in a place there where you just need to live it, because talking about it's going to annoy them. But if they're at the evaluating stage, well, now you can talk about offering some book suggestions and things like that. So it depends what stage. And that's very common in the Bible. You see language like, you are not far, you are far, you are very far, you were once far, but you've been brought near. And so what you get is kind of like this gospel proximity, that people are in different spots, right? What must I do to be saved? The thief on the cross, he's at the submitting stage. You have Nicodemus, he's kind of at the seeing stage, but he really wasn't already at the submitting stage. He's also at the evaluating stage. He's checking out Jesus, he's exploring. The Apostle Paul was at the antagonistic stage. Sometimes when someone's at the antagonistic stage, they need a Damascus Road experience where God just completely interrupts their life. Sometimes it takes pain coming into their life where they experience loss and consequences to wake them up. So a lot there, but those would be my thoughts.
Oh, that's good. I appreciate that. Again, there's lots of questions in the chat that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to tonight. Lots of great insight from lots of different people and lots of really great provocative questions that we could go on and on and on. But I think we should wrap it up here. So again, thanks you so much, Frank, for your insight tonight. Bobby, thank you so much for hosting the conversation. And if there's nothing else, we'll end it here.
Thanks so much, guys.
Everyone.
With you.
All right.